6 minutes that ended Japan's war. June 4, 1942. 7:15 in the morning. Admiral Nagumo Chuichi stands on the bridge of the Akagi and makes the decision that will end the Japanese Empire. He doesn't know that yet. Nobody does. What he knows is that his first strike wave has hit Midway Island and failed to knock out the airbase, and that the strike commander has radioed back requesting a second attack. He knows that his reserve aircraft, 93 planes armed with torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs, held back specifically to destroy American warships, are sitting on the hangar decks ready to launch. And he knows that no American carriers have been spotted anywhere in the search area. At 7:15, Nagumo orders the reserve aircraft rearmed. Torpedoes are unbolted and rolled back into magazines. High-explosive bombs for land targets are wheeled out and mounted. Fuel lines snake across steel decks. The work is careful and methodical. It has to be, because rushed ordnance work kills everyone on a carrier deck, and it cannot be done quickly. The decision is reasonable. Every variable Nagumo can see supports it. What he cannot see is the scout plane that should have been in the air since 4:30 that morning. The float plane from the cruiser Tone, designated Tone 4, assigned to search the sector northeast of the fleet, was launched approximately 30 minutes late. The delay happened because the petty officer responsible for the aircraft's radio antenna was occupied helping recover planes from the Midway strike and had not completed the pre-launch check. An antenna not properly connected, a routine item on a pre-flight list. One sailor's attention pulled in the wrong direction. That 30-minute delay meant that Tone 4 was still flying its search pattern when the American carriers were already turning into the wind to launch. It also meant that when Tone 4 found the American fleet at roughly 7:30 that morning and radioed back its report, the rearming of the reserve aircraft was already underway. The message reached Nagumo at 7:28. 10 enemy surface ships spotted, course bearing southeast. No carrier identification, just surface ships. Nagumo halted the rearming and waited. What followed in the next 2 hours is one of the most consequential series of decisions in the history of naval warfare, and the hardest thing to convey about it is that Nagumo was not making obvious mistakes. He was making defensible choices under incomplete information, in real time, while his ships were under intermittent air attack from Midway-based aircraft. The attacks were ineffective. American planes from Midway flew 6 separate strikes against the Kido Butai that morning and achieved no hits. But they required defensive responses, they occupied the combat air patrol, and they added noise to a situation that was already difficult to read clearly. At 8:09, 41 minutes after the first report, Tone 4 finally radioed the amplifying information. The enemy force is accompanied by what appears to be a carrier. This was the message Nagumo had been dreading. A carrier meant the situation had changed completely. His reserve aircraft were now partially rearmed with the wrong ordnance for attacking warships. His first strike wave was returning from Midway, low on fuel, needing to land. His combat air patrol was cycling through fuel and ammunition from hours of intercept operations. His flight decks were cluttered with aircraft in mid-transition. He could launch what he had immediately: a divided strike, wrong ordnance, no fighter escort, against a carrier battle group that had already demonstrated it could defend itself. Or he could recover the Midway strike force, clear the decks, complete the rearm with anti-ship weapons, and launch a single coordinated overwhelming strike. 45 minutes. That's all he needed. His staff advised the second option. Commander Genda Minoru, the tactical genius who had designed the Pearl Harbor attack and was now lying wounded in his cabin, had communicated the same principle earlier. Never send a divided strike against carriers. Nagumo ordered, recover the Midway aircraft first, rearm everything properly, then launch. 3,000 miles away in Hawaii, A different man was looking at the same situation from the other side of it. Commander Joseph Rochefort had been in the basement of the 14th Naval District headquarters at Pearl Harbor since before dawn. The basement had no windows. The IBM punch card machines ran continuously. The air smelled of cigarettes and coffee that had been hot hours ago. Rochefort had been breaking the Japanese naval code, JN-25, for months. Not all of it. Perhaps 15 to 20% of traffic was readable in near real time. But 15%, in the hands of someone who understood the patterns of Japanese naval communications, was enough. He had told Admiral Nimitz on March 10th, AF is probably Midway. He had confirmed it through a ruse. Midway was instructed to transmit an unencrypted emergency message reporting a freshwater shortage. Within days, Japanese intercepts referenced a water shortage at AF. The target was confirmed. He had broken enough of the encrypted date-time groups to tell Nimitz, June 4th, approaching from the northwest, bearing 315 degrees. Nimitz had positioned 3 carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the Yorktown, which had been rushed through a 72-hour repair that should have taken 3 months, northeast of Midway. The one location Japanese search patterns had left uncovered. The Americans had launched their strikes before Nagumo knew they were there. Back on the Akagi, Nagumo's flight decks finally cleared. The returning Midway aircraft had landed. The reserve strike was being rearmed for the 3rd time in 2 hours. Back to torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs, the weapons that could kill carriers. 36 dive bombers, 54 level bombers, 36 fighters. Fueled, armed with the correct ordnance, crowding onto the launch decks. Nagumo gave the order to turn into the wind. The first aircraft engines roared to life. Deck crews ran to their positions. The carriers began their turn. They never got the chance. What happened in the next 6 minutes began with a sacrifice that the histories sometimes shortchange. For the previous 2 hours, American torpedo bombers had been attacking the Kido Butai in waves. 41 TBD Devastators from 3 different carrier squadrons, VT-6 from Enterprise, VT-8 from Hornet, VT-3 from Yorktown, had pressed their attacks straight and level into walls of Japanese anti-aircraft fire and 0 fighters. The Devastator was slow. It was underpowered. It required a long, straight, level approach to launch its torpedo effectively, which made it essentially unmaneuverable during the attack run. The pilots knew this. They had watched the earlier waves go in. They went anyway. 35 of 41 were shot down. Not a single torpedo hit. But the 0 fighters, every one of them, had been pulled down to wave-top altitude, chasing torpedo bombers. The combat air patrol was at sea level, out of position, unable to climb fast enough to intercept what came next. Lieutenant Commander McClusky's dive bombers from Enterprise arrived at 14,000 feet. They had the sky to themselves. McClusky had been searching for over an hour. His fuel was getting dangerously low. He had made the decision to extend the search pattern rather than return to the carrier. A decision his fuel gauge said was wrong, and his judgment said was right. At 10:20 in the morning, he spotted a Japanese destroyer trailing a wake toward the northeast. He followed it. At 10:22, he found the Kido Butai. His squadron split without radio communication, visual signals, trained procedure. The division made in seconds. 37 dauntless dive bombers rolled into near-vertical dives against Akagi and Kaga. Simultaneously, 17 more from Yorktown hit Soryu. 3 carriers. Same moment. No time to maneuver. No fighters at altitude to intercept. Akagi took the first bomb. It punched through the flight deck near the amidships elevator and detonated in the upper hangar among aircraft that were armed, fueled, and waiting to launch. A second bomb hit seconds later near the port edge, rupturing fuel lines. Commander Fuchida Mitsuo, The Pearl Harbor strike leader, recovering from appendicitis surgery in his cabin, later described the sound as a deep whump that shook the entire ship, followed immediately by a roar of secondary explosions, as torpedoes and bombs cooked off in sequence in the expanding fire. The flight deck simply erupted, flames 200 feet high, aircraft loaded with ordnance chain reacting across the hangar bay. Damage control parties, who ran toward the fire, were incinerated before they reached it. The bridge filled with smoke. Nagumo stood frozen. Kaga died faster. 4 bombs in rapid succession. One hit near the bridge, killing everyone in the command center instantaneously. Another detonated among fueled aircraft on deck. Burning aviation fuel poured through the ship's interior like liquid. Survivors later reported that the heat was intense enough to peel paint from escort destroyers 500 yards away. Soryu absorbed 3 direct hits in 2 minutes. All 3 bombs penetrated the flight deck and detonated in the hangar. Captain Yanagimoto refused evacuation and went down with the ship. 3 carriers, 657 feet of mobile air power each. 6 minutes. On the bridge of the Hiryu, the 4th carrier, separated from the main formation and outside the initial strike radius, Rear Admiral Yamaguchi Tamon watched the smoke rising from his sister ships. He didn't hesitate. Even with 3/4 of the Kido Butai burning, he launched everything he had. 18 dive bombers and 6 fighters found the American task force in early afternoon. They located Yorktown and put 3 bombs into her flight deck. The American carrier slowed, then stopped, trailing smoke. For a moment, a brief, fragile moment, it looked like a trade. 3 Japanese carriers for 1 American. Yamaguchi launched a second wave. 10 torpedo bombers, 6 fighters. They found Yorktown again, now underway and recovering aircraft. 2 torpedoes ripped into her port side. She listed 17 degrees. The order to abandon ship went out. Yorktown looked finished. But Hiryu's position was now known. Late afternoon, 24 dive bombers from Enterprise found her. 4 bombs in rapid succession. The same catastrophic pattern. The same chain reaction of fueled aircraft and stored ordnance. By nightfall, Hiryu was a blazing wreck, dead in the water. Yamaguchi and Captain Kaku remained aboard. They would not leave their ship. Early on June 5th, a destroyer fired torpedoes into Hiryu as a mercy. She sank mid-morning, the last of the 4 to go down. In less than 24 hours, Japan had lost 4 fleet carriers, 248 aircraft, 3,057 men, including over 100 irreplaceable carrier pilots, and the maintenance crews who had trained for years and could not be replaced in months. 300 miles to the west, on the bridge of the battleship Yamato, Admiral Yamamoto Isoroku received the reports in fragments through the afternoon and into the evening. Akagi, fires reported, then silence. Kaga, heavy damage, unable to navigate, then silence. Soryu, nothing after the initial attack. Hiryu, transmitted long enough to report her counterstrikes before silence. Yamamoto's staff stood in the operations room and said nothing. The man who had designed this operation, who had argued in 1941 that Japan had 6 months, perhaps a year, to force a decisive outcome before American industrial capacity overwhelmed them, was now assembling the arithmetic of disaster. He ordered a night surface engagement. His battleships, 11 of them, including the Yamato with her 18-inch guns, began converging on the American task force at maximum speed. The mathematics were impossible. Admiral Spruance, commanding the American carriers, had already done the calculation. He had no reason to risk a night surface brawl against superior gunnery when he could withdraw east at 30 knots, preserve his carriers, and return to strike at dawn. He withdrew. Before first light on June 5th, Yamamoto canceled the operation. In the operations room, staff officers processed the withdrawal order in silence. No one said the word, but it hung over everything. Defeat. For the first time since December 7th, the combined fleet was in retreat. There is a detail that belongs here, not because it changes the outcome, but because it names something important about how disasters are constructed. The scout plane from the cruiser Tone, the one with the antenna problem, the one launched 30 minutes late. If Tone 4 had launched on schedule, it would have found the American fleet an hour earlier. The report would have reached Nagumo at 6:30, before the order to rearm for Midway, before the chain of interrupted decisions, before the flight decks were crowded with aircraft in mid-transition. There is no certainty about what Nagumo would have done with that information, but the sequence of impossibilities he faced at 8:09, wrong ordnance, returning aircraft needing to land, combat air patrol at sea level, decks in chaos, those impossibilities were partly constructed by the 30-minute delay. A petty officer who forgot to connect an antenna. Not carelessness exactly. He was doing his job, another part of his job, in the controlled chaos of a carrier flight deck before dawn. But the timing was wrong by 30 minutes, and 30 minutes was enough. The survivors were ordered to silence. No public announcements, no casualty lists, no acknowledgement that Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu had been sunk. Imperial General Headquarters issued a communique on June 10th, claiming a great victory. 2 American carriers sunk, 150 aircraft destroyed. The Japanese public heard nothing of the 4 carriers. The men who had been there knew. Across the withdrawing fleet, in wardrooms, in crew quarters, in the conversations that happen when the night watch changes and no officer is listening, they were processing the same forbidden conclusion. The war had changed. Japan was no longer on the offensive. Nagumo survived. He was reassigned to shore commands, then to land-based air operations in the Marianas. He never commanded carriers again. In July 1944, during the American invasion of Saipan, he committed suicide rather than face capture. His last recorded words referenced Midway. "I should have died there." Yamamoto survived Midway. The aura of invincibility did not. He continued planning operations, continued trying to force the decisive engagement that would change the strategic equation. On April 18, 1943, exactly 1 year after the Doolittle raid on Tokyo, Yamamoto flew to inspect forward bases in the Solomon Islands. American codebreakers intercepted his flight itinerary. 16 P-38 Lightning fighters were dispatched from Guadalcanal. They intercepted his bomber over Bougainville and shot it down. His body was recovered from the jungle. The same code-breaking apparatus that set the Midway trap killed the man who had planned Pearl Harbor. Rochefort received his Distinguished Service Medal in 1986. He had been dead for 10 years. The wreck of the Yorktown was found in 1999, sitting upright in 16,650 feet of water. Kaga's shattered hull was located in 2019. Akagi, Soryu, and Hiryu have not been found. They lie somewhere in the Central Pacific, 2 miles down, in water cold enough and deep enough that they will be there long after every person who saw them burn is gone. Midway was not lost in 6 minutes of dive bombing. It was lost in the 30 minutes a scout plane launched late. In the 6 months of operational planning that assumed American carriers would be at Pearl Harbor when they weren't. In the confirmation bias of a command that had won every engagement since December and could not fully process the possibility that this one would be different. The dive bombers arrived with the sky to themselves, because 35 torpedo crews flew straight into certain death to put the Zeros at sea level. The sky was empty because someone paid for it to be empty. Their names are in the records. VT-6, VT-8, VT-3. 35 aircraft, 35 crews. Not a single torpedo hit. The sky was empty, and McClusky found the fleet.